Welcome to Cafe Stories. I'm Alfie, your host for today's mystery. We're joining the brilliant detective Nero Wolfe and his trusty assistant Archie Goodwin in The Empty Family album. This story will leave you breathless as layers of deception are peeled away to reveal a truth so shocking that it shattered lives across decades. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Now, dim the lights, silence your phone, and prepare to be drawn into a mystery that will haunt you long after the final revelation. Nero Wolfe and the Empty Family album. Chapter 1. The Anniversary Celebration. It was one of those April evenings that can't decide if it's spring or winter, and I was dressed accordingly in my second-best suit with a light topcoat over my arm as I escorted Lily Rowan up the broad limestone steps of the Thorne residence on East 78th Street. The invitation had specified celebrating 45 years of Eleanor and Richard, and Lily, being Lily, couldn't resist bringing me along to what she called a monument to matrimonial endurance. "You're fidgeting," she said, touching my elbow as we reached the door. "It's just dinner and dancing, not a stakeout." "I'm not fidgeting," I told her. "I'm anticipating. There's a difference." The door opened before we could ring, and a uniformed server welcomed us into a foyer where the scent of lilies was strong enough to make me think of funeral homes instead of anniversaries. Not a good omen. The Thorne residence was exactly what you'd expect from old money that had been consistently refreshed with new money for generations, tasteful, understated opulence that never quite crosses into vulgarity. The kind of place where the furniture isn't meant to impress you until you notice it's all authentic 18th century. Lily handed over her wrap to an attendant while I surveyed the growing crowd. About 60 people were already circulating through the first floor, crystal champagne flutes in hand, their murmurs creating that particular sound of wealthy people being politely amused. "Lily, darling," a woman's voice called from nearby. The voice belonged to Victoria Thorne Carrington, the Thornes' only child, a willowy brunette in her 40s who had inherited her mother's fine bone structure and her father's shrewd eyes. She kissed Lily on both cheeks and then turned her appraising gaze on me. "And you brought Mr. Goodwin. How delightful. Mother will be pleased. She's read all about your adventures." "I hope she doesn't believe everything she reads," I said. "Some of it's even true." Victoria laughed as if I'd said something charming rather than impertinent, then gestured toward the main salon. "Mother and father are receiving in the drawing room. Do go say hello before the dinner gong." The drawing room was crowded with New York's particular blend of old society and new influence, and it took some navigating to reach the couple of honor. Eleanor Thorne was a handsome woman of about 70, her silver hair styled in an elegant bob that framed a face that still showed traces of remarkable beauty. Richard Thorne stood beside her, tall and distinguished with the kind of deep tan that speaks of winter months in Palm Beach. "Miss Rowan," Eleanor said warmly as we approached. "How lovely of you to come." Her eyes shifted to me with interest. "And Archie Goodwin. What a surprise. I do hope Nero Wolfe isn't expecting you to investigate our celebration." "If he were, Mrs. Thorne, I wouldn't be drinking champagne," I replied, holding up my glass. "Congratulations on 45 years. That's longer than some murderers get." Richard Thorne laughed heartily at that. "Eleanor keeps threatening to make it an even 45 with a well-placed pillow, but I hide them all before bedtime." Eleanor patted her husband's arm with affection that looked genuine enough to make me almost believe in 45-year marriages. "Pay no attention to him, Mr. Goodwin. The secret is separate bathrooms, not homicide." After a few more pleasantries, we moved on to allow others their moment with the anniversary couple. Lily was immediately absorbed into a cluster of socialites, leaving me to fend for myself. I don't mind. Years of working for Wolfe had taught me how to extract information from social situations without appearing to do so. I was on my second glass of remarkably good champagne when the dinner gong sounded. The dining room had been transformed with 3 large round tables, each set for 20, with centerpieces of white roses and silver candlesticks that probably predated the Declaration of Independence. I found myself seated between a retired judge's wife and a museum curator, both of whom seemed more interested in their salmon terrine than in conversing with me, which suited me fine. From my position, I had a good view of Eleanor Thorne at the central table. Midway through the main course, some sort of roast that even Fritz might have approved of, I noticed Eleanor's expression change as she looked across the room. Following her gaze, I saw a uniformed maid discreetly signalling to her. Eleanor excused herself with a murmured comment to her husband and followed the maid out a side door. She didn't return until the dessert was being served, and when she did, her composure had visibly slipped. Her hands trembled slightly as she took her seat, and twice she failed to respond when spoken to directly. After dinner came speeches, dancing, and the cutting of a cake elaborate enough to require architectural permits. Throughout it all, Eleanor Thorne maintained her social smile, but I noticed her eyes constantly scanning the room as if looking for someone. It was during the dancing that the real disturbance came. I was waltzing with Lily when a commotion near the library caught my attention. Eleanor's voice, suddenly sharp and clear, cut through the music. "But they were all there yesterday, every single album." I steered Lily toward the sound. The library door was ajar, and through it I could see Eleanor standing near a table covered with photo albums. Victoria was beside her, a hand on her mother's arm. "Mother, please, we can discuss this tomorrow," Victoria was saying. "No, Victoria, someone has removed them. All the photos from 73 to 79, they're gone." Eleanor's voice had taken on a shrill edge that drew stares. Richard Thorne appeared, skillfully inserting himself between his wife and the growing audience. "Eleanor, my dear, perhaps we should continue the celebration. Our guests—" "I don't care about the guests right now," Eleanor said, though she lowered her voice. "Those albums contained our family history. Who would take just those years?" I watched Richard and Victoria exchange a glance I couldn't interpret before Richard gently closed the library door, cutting off the scene from view. The party resumed its rhythm, but with an undercurrent of whispered speculation. Lily and I stayed another hour before making our exit, along with the standard assurances that it had been a lovely evening. It wasn't until we were in the taxi heading downtown that Lily said, "Well, that was interesting." "The salmon was dry," I commented. "Not the food, Escamillo, the drama." Eleanor Thorne doesn't lose her composure over misplaced photo albums. Something's wrong. I agreed but said nothing more. I've learned that when society matrons start getting upset about missing photographs from specific years, there's usually something worth hiding in those images. I didn't know then that by this time tomorrow, Eleanor Thorne would be calling on Nero Wolfe, or that by tomorrow night she would be dead. What I did know was that as our taxi pulled away, I saw Eleanor Thorne in an upstairs window, phone pressed to her ear, her face set in grim determination. Her lips formed words I couldn't hear, but even at a distance I could read their intensity. "I know who took them, and I know why." Chapter 2. A Matter of Pictures. I was in the office the next morning at 8, earlier than usual, because Wolfe had asked me to update the germination records for a new batch of orchids. Theodore was going to be away for 3 days, visiting his sister in Philadelphia, and Wolfe treats the absence of his plant nurse the way some people might respond to leaving their infant with a questionable babysitter. I was hunched over the plant records, wishing Theodore would consider standardizing his abbreviations when the doorbell rang. It was 8:47, more than 2 hours before Wolfe would descend from the plant rooms. Fritz wasn't due back from the market for another hour, and unexpected callers before 9 in the morning are rarely bringing good news. I put the germination records aside, straightened my tie, and went to the front door. Eleanor Thorne stood on the stoop, looking like she hadn't slept. She still wore the elegant composure of a woman accustomed to maintaining appearances, but the shadows under her eyes and the tight line of her mouth told a different story. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "I need to see Nero Wolfe." I didn't bother explaining Wolfe's schedule. People who arrive before 9 in the morning at a detective's office aren't interested in hearing about his employer's rigid adherence to routine. "Come in, Mrs. Thorne," I said, stepping back to admit her. "Mr. Wolfe won't be available until 11, but I can take preliminary information." She nodded and allowed me to take her coat, a cashmere thing that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I led her to the office and installed her in the red leather chair, noting that she perched on its edge rather than settling back. Her hands gripped a slim leather portfolio that I recognized as the kind used for important documents. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked. "Or tea?" "Coffee, thank you," she said. "Black." When I returned with the coffee, she had taken off her gloves and placed them precisely beside her on the chair. The portfolio now lay on her lap, her fingers tapping lightly on its surface. "Now, Mrs. Thorne," I began, seating myself at my desk, "what brings you to us this morning?" She took a sip of coffee before answering. "I want to hire Mr. Wolfe to find my missing photographs." I kept my expression neutral, though I was thinking of her reaction at the party the night before. "The ones you discovered missing at your anniversary celebration?" "Yes." Her fingers stopped tapping. "Mr. Goodwin, I know this may seem trivial to you. People misplace photo albums all the time, but these weren't misplaced. They were deliberately removed." "What makes you certain of that?" "Because every album containing photographs from 1973 through 1979 is missing. Not a single one from that period remains. All other albums, before and after those years, are untouched. That's not coincidence." I nodded. "When did you last see these albums?" 3 days ago. I was preparing displays for the anniversary party. I arranged all the albums chronologically on the library table. I specifically remember looking through the 1975 album because it contained photos from our trip to San Francisco. I noted this down, though I already had my book open from the previous night's events. "And you discovered them missing during the party?" "Yes, I had gone to get the 75 album to show Margaret Winters a particular photo, and that's when I noticed it was gone. Then I checked and found that entire period missing." "Who would have had access to the library?" She spread her hands in a gesture of frustration. "Anyone at the party could have slipped in. The caterers, the staff, our guests. The library wasn't locked." I glanced at the portfolio in her lap. "Do you have copies of the missing photos?" A shadow crossed her face. "Number. That's part of what makes this so distressing. Those were originals, irreplaceable. Mr. Goodwin, I need those albums back." "What do you think is in those photos that someone wouldn't want seen?" Her hand went to her throat, fingers brushing against a gold pendant that disappeared beneath her blouse. "I'm not certain, but they represent an important period in our lives. Richard and I were heavily involved in charity work during those years, particularly with children's welfare organizations. There were many people in those photos, board members, donors, volunteers, some of the children we helped." Something in her tone made me think she had a suspicion she wasn't sharing. I decided to prod a bit. Any particular person you're concerned about in those photos? Her eyes met mine, suddenly sharp. Why would you ask that? Just covering all possibilities, I replied easily. She seemed to relax slightly. Number no one specific, but those were complicated years. People change, reputations are built. Old associations might be inconvenient for someone. I nodded and shifted topics. You said on the phone last night that you knew who took the albums and why. Did I understand that correctly? She looked startled. You heard that? I read lips, I said, which wasn't exactly an answer. She recovered quickly. I was upset, speaking in haste. I have suspicions, but nothing concrete. She opened the portfolio and removed a check, which she placed on my desk. This is a retainer, $5,000. I understand Mr. Wolfe's fees are substantial. I glanced at the check without picking it up. It was indeed made out to Nero Wolfe for $5,000, signed with a precise hand. For missing photo albums, I commented. She met my gaze steadily. For what they contain, Mr. Goodwin? The check would interest Wolfe. $5,000 for tracking down missing photographs was the kind of fee that would overcome his natural inertia, especially since it wouldn't require him to leave the brownstone. Mrs. Thorne, I said, I should tell you that if we take this case, and if it appears that any laws have been broken, we may need to involve the police. I understand, she said, but discretion would be appreciated. My husband and I have a certain position in society. Noted, although I should mention that we saw your distress last night. Others did too. Word might get around. She sighed. Victoria, my daughter, is already concerned that I'm making too much of this. She thinks I'm becoming unreliable. At my age, people begin to worry about that sort of thing. You seem perfectly reliable to me, I offered. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. But I know how I must look, becoming hysterical over old photographs. That's part of why I've come to Mr. Wolfe. If someone has taken those albums deliberately, I want to know why. I asked a few more questions. Who had been at the house in the days before the party? Whether she'd noticed anyone paying particular attention to the library? If anything else was missing, but got nothing particularly useful. As she was about to leave, I had one more question. Mrs. Thorne, if you had to identify one photograph out of all the missing albums, that might be the reason someone took them. Which would it be? She hesitated, and I could see her weighing how much to tell me. Finally, she said, there was a group photo taken at a fundraiser in 1975, the Brighter Futures Gala. Everyone was there that night. Everyone who mattered. Her hand went to the pendant again, an unconscious gesture. I need to go. Please have Mr. Wolfe call me with his decision. I escorted her to the door, promising that Wolfe would contact her later that day. As I watched her slide into the back of a waiting town car, I wondered what faces appeared in that 1975 group photo and which one of them was worth stealing for after 45 years. I returned to the office and looked at the check on my desk. $5,000 for missing photo albums. Either Eleanor Thorne was becoming the unreliable elderly woman her daughter feared, or those photographs contained something worth considerably more than mere memories. I didn't yet know that by the time Wolfe agreed to take her case, Eleanor Thorne would have only a few hours left to live. Chapter 3. Death in the Study. Wolfe had taken the case, of course. $5,000 for work that wouldn't require him to leave the brownstone was precisely the kind of job he preferred. I had placed the check on his desk at 11 sharp when he came down from the plant rooms, along with my report of Eleanor Thorne's visit. He had read it, examined the check, and nodded. Acceptable, he had said. You may call Mrs. Thorne and tell her we will look into her missing photographs. That had been at 11:17 in the morning. At 8:43 that evening, Inspector Kramer called. He didn't bother with preliminaries. "What's your interest in Eleanor Thorne?" he demanded, his voice rough with what might have been fatigue or irritation. I knew better than to be evasive with Kramer when he used that tone. "She consulted us this morning about some missing photo albums. Why?" There was a pause on the line. Then Kramer said, "She's dead, found in her study about an hour ago." My stomach tightened. "Natural causes?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Kramer replied. "No obvious signs of violence. Looks like a heart attack. But given that she visited Wolfe this morning, I'm not taking anything at face value." "We hadn't even started investigating," I said. "Yeah? Well, maybe you can investigate why she was clutching a business card from Nero Wolfe when they found her." That was news to me. I hadn't given Eleanor Thorne a card, though she could have gotten one previously or from someone else. "You want us to come over?" I asked, though I already knew Wolfe wouldn't budge. "Not Wolfe. You." 20 minutes. Kramer hung up. I went to the plant rooms and found Wolfe tending to his cattleyas, his large body moving with surprising delicacy among the flowering orchids. I gave him the news. "Confound it," he muttered, not looking up from a pale yellow bloom he was examining. "Did Kramer suggest foul play?" "He's suspicious enough to call us," I pointed out. "She had one of your business cards on her when she died." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed? That is suggestive. You will go, of course?" "Already planning on it," I said. The Thorne residence looked different at night with police vehicles parked outside, their lights reflecting off the limestone facade. A uniformed officer at the door checked my credentials before allowing me inside. The foyer that had been filled with anniversary guests the previous evening was now occupied by police personnel, speaking in hushed tones. Kramer was waiting for me in the library, the same room where Eleanor had discovered her missing photo albums during the party. He was chewing on an unlit cigar, a sure sign that the situation was eating at him. "Goodwin," he said by way of greeting. "This way." He led me up a flight of stairs and down a hallway to what appeared to be a home office. The room was elegant but functional, with built-in bookshelves, a leather-topped desk, and a sitting area near a fireplace. Eleanor Thorne's body had already been removed, but the outline marked on the floor showed she had been found near the desk. "What happened?" I asked. Kramer shrugged. "According to the housekeeper, Mrs. Thorne came home around 4, said she didn't want to be disturbed, and went straight to this room. At 7:30, her husband came looking for her when she didn't come down for dinner, found her on the floor, called 911, but she was already gone." I scanned the room. "Any sign of the missing photo albums?" "What missing photo albums?" Kramer asked sharply. I told him about Eleanor's visit to Wolfe that morning, keeping it factual and brief. Kramer listened without interrupting, which is unusual for him and never a good sign. "So she thought someone deliberately took these albums," he said when I finished. "Any idea who?" "She claimed not to know, though she hinted she had suspicions." Kramer grunted. "She ever mention any health problems?" "No, but our conversation was brief. Where's Mr. Thorne?" "Downstairs with their daughter. Doctor gave him something to calm him down." Kramer gestured toward the desk. "Look around if you want, but don't touch anything." I moved carefully around the room, keeping my hands in my pockets. The desk was orderly, with papers neatly stacked in trays. A laptop was closed and centered on the blotter. A small silver picture frame held a photo of Eleanor, Richard, and Victoria, taken at what looked like a college graduation. Something caught my eye in the fireplace. I moved closer and saw the remains of what appeared to be photographs, mostly turned to ash, but with a few corners still intact. I pointed them out to Kramer. "Interesting timing to be burning photos," I remarked. Already bagged samples, Kramer said. Could be nothing. Could be the missing albums, I countered. Or just old papers? He didn't sound convinced by his own suggestion. I continued my inspection and noticed something unusual about the desk drawer. It wasn't fully closed, with just the slightest gap visible. I pointed it out to Kramer, who nodded to a technician to open it. Inside was a legal pad with a page torn off, leaving behind the faint impression of writing. Also in the drawer was an envelope, unsealed, containing what looked like a list of names and addresses, neatly typed. "That's evidence," Kramer said when he saw me trying to read it upside down. "But I'll tell you this much, Goodwin. There are 11 names on that list, all with different last names, different addresses." "Any connection?" I asked. "We'll find out," he said, which meant he didn't know yet. Richard Thorne was sitting in the living room when I went downstairs, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. His daughter Victoria sat beside him, her arm around his shoulders. They both looked up when I entered. "Mr. Goodwin," Richard said, his voice hollow. "Eleanor mentioned she'd been to see your employer this morning." "Yes, sir." "About the missing photo albums." Victoria made a small, dismissive sound. "Those albums. She was obsessing over them. I told her they'd probably just been misfiled." "She was quite certain they'd been deliberately taken," I said. Richard looked at his daughter. Eleanor was rarely wrong about such things. "Dad, please," Victoria said, "but this isn't the time." "Mr. Thorne," I interrupted, "did your wife say anything to you after her visit to Mr. Wolfe this morning?" He shook his head. She was out most of the day. I assumed she was following up on the missing albums herself. Eleanor was determined. "Did she have heart problems?" I asked. "Nothing diagnosed," Richard replied. "She was in excellent health for her age, regular checkups, active lifestyle." Something in his tone caught my attention. "You don't think it was natural, do you?" Victoria started to object, but Richard raised a hand to silence her. "I don't know what to think, Mr. Goodwin." But Eleanor was troubled about those photographs. She wouldn't tell me why exactly, said it was better if I didn't know the details until she was certain. I left shortly after, with nothing concrete but a growing sense that Eleanor Thorne's death and her missing photographs were connected in ways that went beyond coincidence. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office with a book and a beer. I gave him a full report, including the burned photo fragments and the list of names. He listened without interruption, his eyes half closed. When I finished, he sighed heavily, reaching for his beer. "Satisfactory," he said, which meant he was thinking. "We have accepted a fee from Mrs. Thorne. We will pursue her case." "Even though she's dead?" "Especially because she is dead," Wolfe replied. "I suspect those photographs did not merely disappear. They were removed for a purpose, and that purpose may be connected to Mrs. Thorne's demise." I couldn't argue with that logic. But as I headed upstairs to bed, I wondered what could possibly be in 40-year-old family photographs that would be worth killing for. Chapter 4. The Missing Years. At breakfast the next morning, I gave Wolfe the morning papers with their front-page stories about Eleanor Thorne's sudden death, most focused on her philanthropic work and society standing, with only brief mentions of an ongoing investigation into the circumstances. None mentioned missing photo albums or a private detective. Wolfe, seated across from me with 3 rashers of Fritz's Canadian bacon and a pile of eggs scrambled with herbs, glanced at the headlines and grunted. "Archie," he said between bites, "you will investigate those names." "The list from her desk?" I asked. He nodded. "The police will identify them eventually, but I prefer not to wait." "You still have your notes?" 10 names and addresses, all copied before Kramer shooed me away." 11, Wolfe corrected. Inspector Kramer mentioned 11 names. He did, I agreed, but I only managed to get 10 before being interrupted. What are we looking for? Connections, Wolfe said, reaching for his second cup of coffee. Mrs. Thorne specifically mentioned photographs from 1973 to 1979. Those years are significant. The names may tell us why. And if they don't, then we shall look elsewhere. Wolfe set down his coffee cup. But start with the names. By 10 o'clock, I was at my desk with my notebook open, making calls and running searches. The names weren't immediately revealing. David Foster, Patricia Wilson, James Harrington, Michael Dubois, Susan Kingsley, Thomas Prescott, Jennifer Chen, Robert Maxwell, Daniel Quinn, and Angela Rossi. Different last names, different addresses scattered across New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. No obvious connection. I started with the simplest approach, calling each name directly. 3 numbers were disconnected. 4 went to voicemail. 2 were answered by people who hung up when I mentioned Eleanor Thorne. By noon, I had only managed to reach Patricia Wilson, who agreed to see me that afternoon, but sounded wary. I reported my limited progress to Wolfe before driving uptown to the address Patricia Wilson had given me, a doorman building on West End Avenue. The doorman announced me, and I was directed to apartment 12B. Patricia Wilson was around 50, with sharp features and alert eyes that sized me up the moment she opened the door. Her apartment was tastefully furnished, but not showy, with built-in bookshelves filled with academic texts on child psychology. "You're from Nero Wolfe?" she said, as she led me to a sitting area. It wasn't a question. "Archie Goodwin," I confirmed. "Thank you for seeing me." She gestured for me to sit. "I read about Eleanor's death this morning." "Heart attack?" "That's what it appears to be," I said, non-committally. "But you don't think so?" I smiled slightly. "We're gathering information. Mrs. Thorne consulted Mr. Wolfe shortly before her death." She nodded slowly. "About missing family photographs, albums from the 1970s. Something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe concern. "And why are you talking to me about this?" "Your name was on a list we found among Mrs. Thorne's papers," I explained. "Along with 9 other names. We're trying to understand the connection." "What were the other names?" she asked carefully. I recited them from memory. Patricia Wilson's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the arm of her chair. "Do you know any of these people?" I asked. "No," she said, too quickly. "Mrs. Wilson, I should mention that this may be connected to Mrs. Thorne's death," I said. She stood abruptly. "I don't see how I can help you. I barely knew Eleanor Thorne. Our paths crossed occasionally at charity functions, that's all." "When were you born, Mrs. Wilson?" I asked, remaining seated. The question caught her off guard. "What? Your birth date? It's relevant." She hesitated. "August 14th, 1975, but I don't see—" "Interesting," I interrupted. "Every name I've been able to verify on that list so far was born in 1975. That was a bluff. She was the first person I'd reached, but her reaction told me I'd struck gold. She paled slightly. "Mr. Goodwin, I think you should leave." I stood, but made no move toward the door. "Mrs. Wilson, if there's something connecting you to the other names on that list, something from 1975, it might help us understand why Eleanor Thorne died." "It was a heart attack," she insisted. "These things happen at her age." "Maybe," I conceded. "But the missing photo albums and that list suggest otherwise. If you know something—" "I don't," she cut in. "Please leave now." I handed her my card, "If you change your mind." She didn't take it, so I placed it on the coffee table and let myself out. Back at the brownstone, I found a message waiting from Victoria Thorne Carrington, asking me to call her. I did, and she invited me to come to the Thorne residence. "There's something you should know," she said, without elaborating further. Victoria met me at the door herself, dressed in black, her face composed but strained. She led me to the library where the photo albums had been displayed during the anniversary party. "My father is resting," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "The last 2 days have been difficult." "Of course," I said. "I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded perfunctorily. "Mr. Goodwin, I need to know what my mother told you." "About the missing albums?" "Not much more than what you already know. She believed they were deliberately taken." Victoria sighed. Mother had become fixated on the past recently. Those albums, particularly the ones from the 70s, had become an obsession. "Why those years specifically?" I asked. "I don't know," she said, but her eyes slid away from mine. "Mother was involved in many charity projects back then. It was before I was born." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not in any of the missing albums?" "No, but I was born in 1981. I filed that away. "Mrs. Thorne Carrington, your mother mentioned a particular photo from the 1975 Brighter Futures Gala. Does that mean anything to you?" A slight tension appeared around her mouth. "Mother was on the founding board of Brighter Futures. It was an organization that helped place orphaned or abandoned children with adoptive families. That caught my attention." "Was Brighter Futures an adoption agency?" "Not exactly, more of a support organization for the existing system. It disbanded in the early 80s, I believe." "Were there any scandals associated with it?" I asked. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Why would you ask that?" "Just exploring possibilities," I said mildly. "Well, the answer is no, it was a respected organization. My mother devoted years to helping children find homes." I nodded. "Did your mother ever mention names like David Foster, Patricia Wilson, or any of these others?" I recited the rest of the list. Victoria's composure wavered for just an instant. "Number, should those names mean something to me?" "I was hoping you might tell me," I replied. She stood, signaling the end of our conversation. "Mr. Goodwin, my mother's funeral is the day after tomorrow. I'd appreciate it if you didn't pursue this investigation until after we've laid her to rest." "I understand your concern," I said, standing as well. "But if there's any chance your mother's death wasn't natural—" "It was a heart attack," she said firmly. "The medical examiner confirmed it this morning." That was news to me. "No signs of foul play?" "None," Victoria stated. "And now if you'll excuse me." On my way out, I noticed a small framed photo on a side table in the hallway. It showed a much younger Eleanor Thorne with a group of women, all holding champagne glasses and smiling at the camera. The frame was inscribed, "Brighter Futures Board 1974. As I left the Thorne residence, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Goodwin?" I answered. A male voice, tight with tension, spoke quickly on. "This is Daniel Quinn. You called earlier. About Eleanor Thorne." "Yes, Mr. Quinn. I'd like to—" "Stop looking," he interrupted. "Stop calling people on that list. You have no idea what you're getting into." "Why don't you explain it to me?" I suggested. "I can't. Just know that some secrets should stay buried." The line went dead. Back at the brownstone, I reported everything to Wolfe. He listened attentively, his fingertips pressed together, in that way he has when something interests him. "So," I concluded, "we have people born in 1975, the year of a gala for an organization called Brighter Futures that helped place orphans, and someone who definitely doesn't want us asking questions." Wolfe nodded. "Plus a deceased client who collected photographs of that period and whose death, while apparently natural, is suspicious in its timing." "Heart attacks can be induced," I pointed out. "Indeed," Wolfe agreed. "Continue your inquiries into these names, and Archie, be cautious. Mr. Quinn's warning suggests there may be considerable resistance to our investigation." I nodded, but little did I know just how prophetic that warning would prove to be. Within 3 hours, the Brownstones' phone would ring again, this time with a threat meant for Wolfe himself. Chapter 5. Dangerous Memory. The threatening call came at 4:17 that afternoon, while Wolfe was up in the plant rooms with his orchids. I was at my desk working through the list of names, having managed to verify birth years for 3 more, all 1975, as I had suspected. The phone rang, and I picked it up with my customary greeting. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. There was a brief silence, then a voice, electronically distorted, said, "Tell Wolfe to drop the Thorne investigation. The woman died of natural causes. Leave it alone." "And whom shall I say is calling with this friendly advice?" I asked, keeping my tone casual while reaching for a notepad. "This isn't advice. It's a warning. There are powerful people who don't want the past disturbed. Powerful people usually sign their threats," I remarked. "Gives them more weight." "You're not taking this seriously," the voice said. "Perhaps you'll reconsider when you learn what happened to Peter Vaughan." The line went dead before I could ask who Peter Vaughan was. I immediately called our phone company contact to trace the call, but as I expected, it had come from a disposable cell phone. I reported the call to Wolfe when he came down from the plant rooms at 6 o'clock. He settled his 1/7 of a ton into his custom chair behind the desk and adjusted the books to his liking. "And who," he inquired after I had finished, "is Peter Vaughan?" "That's what I've been trying to find out for the past hour and a half," I said. "No Peter Vaughan appears in any of Mrs. Thorne's papers that we know of, and he's not on the list of 11 names, but—" I consulted my notes. "There is a Peter Vaughan who was a social worker in New York from 1970 to 1983, specializing in adoption cases." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Indeed? And his current whereabouts?" "That's the interesting part. Peter Vaughan died 2 weeks ago, car accident on the Henry Hudson Parkway. His vehicle went off the road late at night. No witnesses." "Convenient timing," Wolfe observed. "Very. And here's another tidbit. Vaughan worked closely with several adoption agencies in the 70s, including consulting for charitable organizations, one of which was Brighter Futures." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Saul," he said decisively. I nodded and reached for the phone. 20 minutes later, Saul Panzer was in the office, receiving his instructions from Wolfe. Saul is the best operative in New York, maybe in the country, and he doesn't come cheap. But for this job, we needed his particular talents. "I want you to locate these individuals," Wolfe told him, handing over the list of names. "Approach with extreme caution. Present yourself as researching a historical piece on the Brighter Futures organization. Do not mention Mrs. Thorne's death or the missing photographs unless absolutely necessary." Saul glanced over the list. "What am I looking for specifically?" "Their connection to Eleanor Thorne and to each other," Wolfe replied. "And anything unusual about their births or adoptions?" "Adoptions?" Saul's eyebrows rose slightly. "A working hypothesis," Wolfe said, "to be verified or discarded based on your findings." After Saul left, I prepared to head out myself. I had an appointment to interview Margaret Winters, Eleanor Thorne's closest friend, who might know something about the missing photographs. "Be circumspect," Wolfe advised as I put on my coat. "If our anonymous caller is to be believed, inquiries into this matter have already resulted in 1 death besides Mrs. Thorne's. Not to mention the warning about powerful people," I added. "Everyone's favorite bogeyman." Wolfe did not smile. "Power, in this case, may refer to social position rather than political influence. Proceed accordingly." Margaret Winters lived in a pre-war building on Park Avenue, the kind with 14-foot ceilings and staff who still wear white gloves. She was a widow in her 70s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and the kind of elegant posture that comes from a lifetime of being reminded not to slouch. She received me in her living room, offering tea, served in Royal Doulton, that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Eleanor was my dearest friend for over 40 years, she said after the preliminaries were dispensed with. Her death is inconceivable to me." "I understand you were at the anniversary party when she discovered the missing albums," I said. Mrs. Winters nodded. She was quite upset, far more than seemed warranted for misplaced photographs, but Eleanor was never one to misplace things. She was meticulously organized. "Did she tell you why those particular albums were important?" Mrs. Winters hesitated, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "Not specifically, but she mentioned they contained photographs from her days working with the motherless babies, as she called them." Motherless babies? Children who needed homes. Eleanor did remarkable work in the 70s, finding families for children who had been abandoned or surrendered. She considered it her life's greatest achievement, aside from Victoria, of course. "Was this through Brighter Futures?" I asked. "Yes, primarily. Eleanor was on the board. They worked with several adoption agencies to place difficult cases." "Difficult cases?" Mrs. Winters set her teacup down with a gentle clink. "Children with health issues, older children, those of mixed race. This was the 70s, Mr. Goodwin. Adoption preferences were more limited then. And Mrs. Thorne helped place these children." "She did more than that," Mrs. Winters said with a touch of pride. "She personally intervened in many cases, finding just the right families. Eleanor had a gift for matching children with parents who would treasure them." "Do you recall a social worker named Peter Vaughan?" I asked. The brief flicker in her eyes told me she did, though she said, "The name sounds vaguely familiar, but I couldn't say for certain." "He died recently," I said. "Car accident." Mrs. Winters's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. "How terrible." "Mrs. Winters, did Eleanor mention anything unusual about the Brighter Futures organization? Any irregularities or controversies?" "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "It was above reproach." "Then why would someone steal photographs from that period of her life?" Mrs. Winters looked at me directly. "Mr. Goodwin, the past is rarely as simple as we remember it. Eleanor was a good woman who did good work, but even the best intentions sometimes lead to complicated situations." "What kind of complicated situations?" "I've said all I care to on the matter," she replied, her tone making it clear the interview was over. As I was leaving, she called after me, "Mr. Goodwin, Eleanor wore a gold locket with a small key inside. It was a family piece she never removed. Was she wearing it when she died?" I remembered the pendant Eleanor had touched repeatedly during our interview. "I believe so. Why?" "Just curious," she said, but her expression suggested it was more than idle interest. "Back at the brownstone, I found a message from Fred Durkin, another of our operatives, whom Wolfe had dispatched to investigate the defunct Brighter Futures organization. His report was brief but significant. All records from Brighter Futures had been destroyed in a storage facility fire in 1987. The timing seemed suspiciously convenient. More disturbing was a call from Saul. He had located Daniel Quinn, the man who had warned me to stop investigating. Quinn had agreed to meet with him the following morning, but insisted on public location and expressed extreme nervousness. "He thinks he's being watched," Saul reported. When I shared this with Wolfe over dinner, Fritz had prepared a cassoulet that would make a French chef weep with envy. He merely nodded thoughtfully. "The pieces begin to align," he said, "but the picture remains unclear." "What about the locket Mrs. Winters mentioned?" I asked. "Could be important." "Indeed," Wolfe agreed. "We should inquire about it with Mr. Thorne." Later that night, as I was typing up my reports, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Stop looking for us. We never asked to be found." I showed it to Wolfe, who read it with narrowed eyes. "Interesting," he murmured. "Not a threat, but a plea." "From one of the names on the list?" I suggested. "Presumably. And it suggests they know they are being sought not only by us but by others as well." Wolfe leaned back in his chair. "Archie, I believe we are dealing with a matter far more complex than missing photographs. These 11 individuals are connected to Eleanor Thorne in a way that someone finds deeply threatening enough to kill for." I couldn't disagree with his assessment. But as I went to bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface of a secret that had remained buried for nearly half a century, a secret that had already claimed at least 2 lives. Chapter 6. The Social Circle. Eleanor Thorne's memorial service was scheduled for 11 o'clock at St. Bartholomew's Church on Park Avenue. I arrived at 10:30, under instructions from Wolfe to observe the attendees and their interactions. Wolfe himself remained at the brownstone, naturally. The only church he regularly attends is the one in his kitchen where Fritz officiates. The morning was cool and bright, the kind of spring day that makes New York seem almost civilized. I parked the sedan 2 blocks away and walked, noting the collection of black town cars and limousines already lining the street near the church. Eleanor Thorne had moved in circles where people didn't arrive by subway, even for funerals. Inside, the church was filling with the sort of crowd you'd expect, well-dressed, well-preserved members of Manhattan's upper crust, exchanging muted greetings and appropriately somber handshakes. I positioned myself toward the back, where I could observe without being conspicuous. Victoria Thorne Carrington was receiving condolences near the front, standing beside her father, who looked ashen and unsteady. A distinguished man in his 60s, whom I didn't recognize, stood protectively at Richard Thorne's side, occasionally murmuring something in his ear. I felt a touch on my arm and turned to find Margaret Winters beside me, elegant in her mourning clothes. "Mr. Goodwin," she said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Paying respects," I replied. Mrs. Thorne was our client, however briefly. Mrs. Winters nodded, her eyes moving to the front of the church. "Richard is taking it very hard. They were truly devoted to each other." "Who's the man with him?" "Lawrence Fleming. He's a doctor. He and Richard have been friends since college. He's also been the family physician for years." I filed that away. "Dr. Fleming knew Mrs. Thorne well, then?" "Oh, yes. He and his wife Claire were part of the same social circle for decades. Lawrence worked with Eleanor on several charity initiatives in the 70s, if I recall correctly." That caught my interest. "Brighter futures." Mrs. Winters gave me a sharp look. "Yes, actually." He provided medical consultations for some of the children. She paused. "Mr. Goodwin, have you learned anything about those missing photographs?" "Not yet," I said. "Did Mrs. Thorne discuss them with you after the party?" "Briefly. She called me the following morning, the day she died. She mentioned she'd been to see Mr. Wolfe." Mrs. Winters hesitated. "She said something odd. She said, 'Some secrets shouldn't stay buried forever, especially when they were buried for the wrong reasons.' Before I could ask what that meant, the service began. I remained in my position, watching the congregation as much as the ceremony. About halfway through the eulogies, I noticed a woman in her 50s slip into the church and take a seat in the last pew. She was dressed appropriately but not expensively, and kept her head down. When Victoria rose to speak about her mother, the woman's shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. After the service, I lingered on the church steps, observing the departing mourners. Most were heading to the Thorne residence for the reception. The woman who had arrived late exited quickly, avoiding conversations, and started walking briskly down Park Avenue. I followed her for 2 blocks before catching up. "Excuse me," I said. She startled, turning to face me with alarm. Up close, I could see she had been crying. "Yes." "I noticed you at Mrs. Thorne's service. Did you know her well?" The woman studied me warily. "Who are you?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm working with Nero Wolfe on a matter related to Mrs. Thorne." Something like recognition flickered in her eyes. "The detective?" When I nodded, she glanced around nervously. "I shouldn't be talking to you." "Why not?" "Because it's not safe." She started to walk away, then stopped. "I worked at Sunshine Adoptions in the 70s. Eleanor Thorne was one of our biggest supporters. She was a good woman, whatever anyone says." "Who's saying otherwise?" She shook her head. "I've already said too much. Just know that not everyone in that church today was mourning her." With that, she hurried away, turning the corner before I could follow. I headed to the Thorne residence, where the reception was in full swing. The home that had hosted a celebration just days earlier now accommodated a more subdued gathering. Servers circulated with trays of canapes and glasses of champagne. Mourning in high society still involves good catering. I made my way through the rooms, listening to conversations and watching interactions. In the library, scene of Eleanor's discovery of the missing albums, I found Richard Thorne alone, staring at the shelves where the albums had once been displayed. "Mr. Goodwin," he said without turning, "I wondered if you'd come." "My condolences, Mr. Thorne." He nodded vaguely. "Eleanor thought very highly of Nero Wolfe. She said he was the only one who would take her seriously about those damned albums." He gestured at the empty space on the shelf. "Still missing? Though it hardly matters now." "It might matter a great deal," I suggested. "If they had anything to do with her death." Richard Thorne's face tightened. "The medical examiner ruled it a heart attack." "Yes. But the timing is suspicious, wouldn't you say?" He was silent for a moment. "Eleanor had been agitated recently, ever since we ran into Judith Kramer at the country club last month." "Judith Kramer?" "Former board member of Brighter Futures. She and Eleanor had some sort of falling out years ago. They hadn't spoken in decades, but seeing her seemed to upset Eleanor deeply." I made a mental note of the name. "Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Winters mentioned that your wife wore a locket with a key inside. Do you know what that key was for?" His hand went unconsciously to his necktie, where a small bulge was visible beneath the silk. "Eleanor gave it to me. Said I might need it someday." Before I could press further, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "Dad, Dr. Fleming is looking for you." Richard nodded and moved to leave, then paused beside me. "Mr. Goodwin, Eleanor kept a small, safe deposit box at Manhattan Trust. I believe that's what the key opens." After he left, Victoria fixed me with a cool stare. "I thought we agreed you wouldn't pursue this until after the funeral." "Technically, this is after the funeral," I pointed out. "Just not after the reception." She didn't smile. "My father is fragile right now. Whatever you're investigating, I'd appreciate if you'd leave him out of it." "That may not be possible," I said. "Your mother's last actions suggest she was worried about something from the past, something connected to Brighter Futures." Victoria's composure slipped just for an instant. Brighter Futures was dissolved decades ago. Whatever good or ill it did is ancient history. "History has a way of becoming present tense when someone dies," I remarked. Dr. Lawrence Fleming approached, resting a protective hand on Victoria's shoulder. "Victoria, your father is asking for you." He glanced at me. "I don't believe we've met." I introduced myself, and Fleming's eyebrows rose slightly. "Nero Wolfe's associate?" "Interesting. I wasn't aware Eleanor had consulted a detective. It was regarding some missing photo albums, I explained. Dr. Fleming, I understand you worked with Mrs. Thorne on the Brighter Futures initiative in the 70s. His smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened slightly. Ancient history, Mr. Goodwin. Eleanor did wonderful work helping children find homes. That's her legacy, not some old photographs. Were you at the country club when Mrs. Thorne encountered Judith Kramer last month? I asked. Fleming's hand tightened visibly on Victoria's shoulder. I should get back to Richard. He's not taking this well. As they walked away, I noticed a thin, elegantly dressed woman watching our exchange with undisguised interest. When our eyes met, she didn't look away but instead raised her champagne glass in a small, ironic toast. I made my way toward her. I don't believe we've met. Archie Goodwin. I know who you are, she replied. Claire Fleming. Lawrence is my husband. Ah. And did you also work with Brighter Futures back in the day? Claire Fleming's smile was cold. Remember that I was rather the opposite of Eleanor in that regard. She found homes for children. I couldn't have any. She sipped her champagne. Ironic, isn't it? Some women discard their babies. Others would kill to have one. The chill in her voice made me wonder if she meant that last part literally. Before I could respond, she moved away, leaving me with the distinct impression that the social circle surrounding Eleanor Thorne concealed more tensions than I had initially suspected. On my drive back to the brownstone, I called Saul to check on his meeting with Daniel Quinn. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight. Archie, Quinn didn't show. I waited 2 hours. He'd get cold feet. More than that, his apartment manager says Quinn packed a bag and left last night. Said he was going out of town indefinitely. Another thread unravelling. By the time I reached the brownstone to report to Wolfe, I had the unsettling feeling that everyone connected to Brighter Futures was either running scared or maintaining a carefully constructed facade, and it wasn't entirely clear which reaction was more suspicious. Chapter 7. What the Pictures Show. The following morning I brought the reports from Saul, Fred, and myself to Wolfe at breakfast. He had done his morning routine with the orchids and was enjoying Fritz's buckwheat cakes with sausage and maple syrup. I waited until he had taken the edge off his hunger before sliding the folder toward him. All the findings so far, I said, including notes from the memorial service. Wolfe grunted acknowledgement and continued eating. Despite his apparent disinterest, I knew his mind was working on the problem. When he finally spoke, he had finished his third cake. Archie, I want to see the safe deposit box. I raised my eyebrows. That would require Richard Thorne's cooperation. And the key? Yes. Wolfe dabbed his lips with his napkin. Call him. Explain that we were retained by his wife and are obligated to pursue her interests. The key may well unlock the central mystery. He's grieving, I pointed out. Victoria might interfere. Then be persuasive, Wolfe said, reaching for his coffee. That is one of your talents, is it not? I couldn't argue with that. By 10 o'clock, I was on the phone with Richard Thorne. He sounded exhausted, but surprisingly receptive. Eleanor wanted me to give you that key, he said. She as much as told me so, but I'd prefer to accompany you to the bank. Of course, I agreed. Would this afternoon be convenient? We arranged to meet at Manhattan Trust at 2. Before heading out, I received a call from Fred Durkin, who had been investigating Peter Vaughan, the deceased social worker. Archie, Fred said, Vaughan's apartment was cleaned out the day after he died. Landlord says men claiming to be relatives took everything. Did they show identification? Nope. Paid 3 months outstanding rent in cash, and the landlord didn't ask questions. Convenient, I commented. Anything else? Yeah, before his car accident, Vaughan had lunch with someone at a restaurant in Midtown, Waitress remembers because they argued. She says the other person showed Vaughan something that upset him badly. He left looking like he'd seen a ghost. Description of this person: older woman, very well dressed. Waitress thought she looked like old money. I thanked Fred and hung up, then called Saul to check his progress on the list. He had located 3 more individuals, all born in 1975, all adopted, and all extremely reluctant to discuss anything related to Eleanor Thorne or brighter futures. But one of them slipped, Archie, Saul reported. Jennifer Chen. When I mentioned Eleanor's death, she said, "I hope she took her secrets to the grave." Then she clammed up and asked me to leave. With this information simmering, I headed to Manhattan Trust to meet Richard Thorne. He was waiting in the lobby, looking more composed than he had at the memorial service, but still fragile. He held out a small brass key attached to a plain ring. "This was always around Eleanor's neck," he said. "I never knew what it was for until the night she died. She made me promise to give it to you if anything happened to her." That was news to me. "She mentioned me specifically?" He nodded. "She said, 'If anything happens, give this to Archie Goodwin, he'll know what to do.' I assumed she'd discussed it with you." She hadn't, but I didn't tell him that. We were escorted to the vault area where the manager personally attended to us. The safe deposit box was small, requiring both the bank's key and Eleanor's to open. Inside was a single manila envelope, sealed and unmarked. "Do you want to open it?" I asked Richard. He shook his head. "Eleanor wanted you to have it. Whatever it contains, it was important to her. That's all I need to know." I could have insisted we look together, but his dignity deserved respect. We returned the empty box, and I left with the envelope tucked securely inside my jacket. Richard and I parted at the bank's entrance. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "whatever Eleanor was involved in, she was a good person. Please remember that." I never doubted it, I assured him. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office, reading a book on orchid propagation. He set it aside as I entered and regarded the envelope I placed on his desk with keen interest. "You haven't opened it?" he asked. "Thought we should do that together," I replied. "Given that our client apparently intended it for me specifically." Wolfe nodded. "Proceed." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside were several photographs, originals, not copies, and a handwritten note on heavy stationery. The photographs showed a group of people at what appeared to be a formal charity event, with a banner reading Brighter Futures Gala 1975 visible in the background. "The missing photos," I said, "at least some of them." "Indeed." Wolfe extended his hand and I passed them over. He examined each photograph carefully. They showed the usual charity event scenes: wealthy donors in formal wear, speeches, champagne toasts. Eleanor Thorne appeared in several, looking younger but recognizable, often standing near a table where couples were seated with infants. "Observe the background of this one," Wolfe said, handing a particular photo back to me. I looked where he indicated. Behind the main group, partially obscured, a man and woman appeared to be exchanging an envelope. The woman's face wasn't visible, but the man was turned enough to be recognizable as a much younger Peter Vaughan. "Interesting," I murmured. "What about the note?" Wolfe unfolded the stationery and read silently for a moment, then looked up. "Mrs. Thorne was more perceptive than we gave her credit for," he said. "She anticipated her own death." "What does it say?" "It is addressed to you, Archie. You should read it yourself." I took the paper. Eleanor's handwriting was elegant but hurried. "Mr. Goodwin, if you're reading this, my fears were justified. The photographs I've enclosed are the only ones I managed to secure before the others disappeared. I removed them from the albums the day before our anniversary celebration, sensing someone might try to eliminate this evidence. For nearly 50 years, I've carried the burden of knowledge about what really happened at Brighter Futures. What began as a genuine charity became something dark and corrupt. Between 1973 and 1979, certain individuals used our organization to facilitate private adoptions for wealthy clients willing to pay substantial sums. The children were not orphans as claimed, but rather babies purchased from desperate young women or, in some cases, literally stolen from mothers told their infants had died at birth. I discovered this scheme too late to stop it entirely, but I managed to create my own records, matching the children with their birth information. The 11 names you've likely found among my papers are individuals I helped place with genuinely loving families despite the corrupt circumstances of their adoptions. I've watched over them from a distance all these years. Recently, I encountered Judith Kramer, who warned me that someone was cleaning house, eliminating everyone who knew about the scheme. Peter Vaughan's death was no accident. I fear I will be next. The most damning evidence is in these photographs. Look at the backgrounds, the exchanges happening just out of focus. The key players were Dr. Lawrence Fleming, who falsified birth and death certificates, Peter Vaughan, who identified vulnerable mothers, and the adoption coordinator who arranged the financial transactions and kept records of the real parentage. The note ended abruptly there, as if Eleanor had been interrupted while writing it. The name of the adoption coordinator, presumably the mastermind, was missing. Wolfe studied the photographs again. The faces in these images tell a story Mrs. Thorne could not complete in writing, he said. What we are witnessing is evidence of a criminal adoption scheme that certain parties are willing to kill to keep concealed. But who? I asked. Fleming is still alive, Vaughan is dead, and we don't know who the coordinator was. I believe we do, Wolfe replied. Or rather, we have sufficient information to make a confident deduction. These photographs, combined with your investigations, provide the answer. I looked at him expectantly, but he simply shook his head. Not yet, Archie. We require one more piece of confirmation. He pressed the button to summon Fritz. Please, contact Mr. Thorne. Inform him we need to speak with him immediately. Then call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have information regarding Eleanor Thorne's death and that his presence is requested here at 9 tomorrow morning. You're calling a gathering? I asked, surprised. Yes, Wolfe said. It is time to conclude this matter. The final album will be completed tomorrow. As I made the calls, I reviewed the evidence we had gathered, trying to see what Wolfe had seen in those photographs. The pieces were there, but the complete picture remained just beyond my grasp. Whoever had masterminded the illegal adoption scheme had been careful, powerful, and connected enough to orchestrate at least 2 deaths decades after the crimes. What I didn't realize was that the killer had one more target in mind before Wolfe's orchestrated revelation, and that target was already in grave danger. Chapter 8. The Final Album. By 8:30 the next morning, the office was ready. I had arranged the yellow chairs in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk, with the red leather chair positioned slightly apart. At Wolfe's instruction, I had placed copies of the photographs from Eleanor's safe deposit box in a folder on his desk, along with other materials we had gathered. Fritz had been directed to prepare coffee and refreshments for multiple guests. Wolfe came down from the plant rooms at precisely 8:55, 5 minutes early, a sure sign he considered the morning's business of special importance. He settled his 1/7 of a ton into his chair, adjusted items on his desk to his satisfaction, and regarded me with a slight nod. Are all arrangements complete, Archie? Yes, sir, I said. Kramer confirmed he's coming. Richard Thorne is on his way. Victoria Thorne Carrington initially declined but changed her mind when I mentioned her mother's final letter. Dr. and Mrs. Fleming were reluctant, but agreed, after I implied the police would otherwise make a more formal request for their presence. Margaret Winters accepted immediately. Saul is bringing one of the names from the list. Jennifer Chen agreed to come after he explained the circumstances. Satisfactory, Wolfe said, opening his current book to check the bookmark before closing it and setting it aside. Inspector Kramer was the first to arrive, 10 minutes early and predictably irascible. He had an unlit cigar clamped between his teeth, and his face looked like he'd been up all night. "This better be good, Wolfe," he growled, taking his usual place in the red leather chair. "I've got a stack of cases on my desk that don't involve society matrons dying of natural causes." "I assure you, Inspector, your time will not be wasted," Wolfe replied calmly. The others arrived in quick succession. Richard Thorne looked pale but composed. Victoria appeared tense, her eyes darting around the office as if searching for threats. The Flemings entered together, Lawrence projecting professional confidence, while Claire maintained an icy composure. Margaret Winters took her seat with dignified grace, acknowledging Kramer with a slight nod. Jennifer Chen, a poised woman in her late 40s, was the last to arrive, escorted by Saul Panzer, who then positioned himself unobtrusively by the door. Once everyone was seated and Fritz had served coffee, Wolfe cleared his throat. "I have asked you all here because each of you has a connection to Eleanor Thorne and to the events surrounding her death," he began. "Those events have their roots in activities that took place between 1973 and 1979 during the operation of the Brighter Futures organization." Dr. Fleming shifted in his chair. "I don't see the point of dredging up ancient history about a defunct charity." "Patience, Doctor," Wolfe said. "Brighter Futures was ostensibly founded to help place difficult-to-adopt children with families, a noble purpose. However, it also served as a cover for a criminal enterprise." Victoria made a sound of protest. "This is outrageous. My mother devoted herself to helping children." "Indeed she did, Miss Thorne Carrington," Wolfe agreed, "which is why, when she discovered the criminal activity, she took steps to mitigate the damage while preserving evidence." "What criminal activity?" Kramer demanded. Wolfe nodded to me, and I distributed copies of Eleanor's letter to each person, withholding only the photographs. "As you can see from Eleanor Thorne's own words," Wolfe continued after giving them time to read, "Brighter Futures was used to facilitate illegal adoptions. Children were purchased from vulnerable mothers, or in some cases, stolen by falsely informing birth mothers their babies had died." A heavy silence fell over the room. Jennifer Chen was the first to speak, her voice tight with emotion. "Is this true? Was I stolen?" Wolfe shook his head. "No, Ms. Chen. You were among those Mrs. Thorne personally helped place with a loving family, despite the corrupt circumstances. She kept track of you and 10 others throughout your lives, ensuring your well-being from a distance." "That's why she had our names and addresses," Jennifer said softly. "She was watching over us." "Precisely," Wolfe confirmed. "Now to continue. This operation required 3 key participants: a medical professional who could falsify birth and death certificates, a social worker who identified vulnerable mothers, and a coordinator who managed the financial transactions and kept records." Dr. Fleming's face had gone rigid. Claire Fleming's hand trembled slightly as she set down her coffee cup. "From Mrs. Thorne's letter and our investigation, we know that Dr. Lawrence Fleming and social worker Peter Vaughan filled 2 of these roles," Wolfe stated. "Dr. Fleming provided the medical credentials necessary for the scheme, while Vaughan identified potential birth mothers." "This is preposterous," Fleming sputtered. "You have no proof." "On the contrary," Wolfe replied, nodding to me again. "I distributed the photographs from Eleanor's safe deposit box. There was a collective intake of breath as they saw the images. These photographs," Wolfe continued, "show exchanges of money and documents at the 1975 Brighter Futures Gala. If you look closely at this one," he held up a particular photo. You can see Dr. Fleming accepting an envelope from Peter Vaughan, while in the background, the adoption coordinator observes the transaction. All eyes went to the photograph, where a partial figure could be seen watching Fleming and Vaughan. 2 weeks ago, Peter Vaughan died in what appeared to be a car accident, Wolfe said. Shortly thereafter, Eleanor Thorne discovered her photo albums from the 1970s had been stolen, albums containing these and other incriminating images. The day after consulting me about the theft, Mrs. Thorne also died. The medical examiner ruled it a heart attack, Kramer pointed out, though his tone had lost some of its certainty. Indeed, a heart attack that could have been induced by certain medications that leave minimal traces, particularly in a woman of Mrs. Thorne's age, Wolfe replied, a fact that a medical professional would know. Dr. Fleming started to rise, but Saul's presence by the door made him reconsider. "That still doesn't tell us who the coordinator was," Victoria said. "The mastermind." "Doesn't it?" Wolfe asked. "Consider who had the necessary access, influence, and motivation. This person needed to move in wealthy social circles to identify potential adoptive parents willing to pay. They needed regular contact with both Dr. Fleming and Mr. Vaughan, and most importantly, they needed a reason." Margaret Winters's face had gone very still. Claire Fleming's knuckles were white where she gripped her purse. "There is one final piece of evidence," Wolfe said. "When Eleanor Thorne encountered Judith Kramer at the country club, she learned that someone was cleaning house, eliminating those who knew about the scheme. Shortly after, Peter Vaughan had lunch with a well-dressed older woman, after which he appeared deeply disturbed. The next day, he died. You're suggesting this woman arranged Vaughan's death?" Richard Thorne asked. "I am stating it as fact," Wolfe replied. "Just as this same person arranged for Eleanor's death when she began investigating the missing photographs." Claire Fleming suddenly stood. "This is absurd. You can't possibly prove any of this." "Mrs. Fleming," Wolfe said quietly, "you were unable to have children of your own. As you mentioned to Archie at the memorial reception, you told him, 'Some women discard their babies, others would kill to have one.' An interesting choice of words." All eyes turned to Claire, whose composure was cracking. "You were the adoption coordinator," Wolfe continued. "You used your social connections to identify wealthy couples desperate for children. Your husband provided the medical credentials. Vaughan found the babies. And you kept meticulous records of the real parentage, records that Eleanor Thorne discovered and copied." "You can't prove any of this," Claire said, her voice shaking. "We can," I interjected, "with the records from Eleanor's other safe deposit box, the one at First National that she opened under her maiden name. That was a complete bluff. We had no evidence of such a box, but Claire's face told us everything we needed to know. When you saw Judith Kramer mention the old photos to Eleanor at the country club," Wolfe continued, "you panicked. You eliminated Vaughan, then stole the albums from the Thorne residence. When you learned Eleanor had consulted me, you ensured she would not live to reveal your crimes." "Claire!" Dr. Fleming looked at his wife in horror. "Tell them this isn't true." Claire Fleming's elegant facade finally shattered. "They were going to expose us, Lawrence. After all these years, our whole life would have been destroyed. Those women didn't want their babies, and they were drug addicts, teenagers, prostitutes. We gave those children to people who could provide for them, who deserved them." "And made a fortune doing it," Kramer said, rising from his chair. "Mrs. Fleming, you're under arrest for the murders of Peter Vaughan and Eleanor Thorne." As Kramer read Claire her rights, with Dr. Fleming looking on in stunned disbelief, Jennifer Chen approached Richard Thorne. "I'd like to thank Mrs. Thorne," she said quietly. "Despite everything, she made sure I went to a good family. She watched over all of us." Richard nodded. tears in his eyes. That was Eleanor, always protecting the children. After everyone had gone, the Flemings with Kramer, the others to come to terms with the revelations in their own ways, Wolfe and I sat in the office, him with a beer, me typing up the final report. "You know," I said, "we never did find the missing albums." "No," Wolfe agreed. "I suspect Claire Fleming destroyed them, but the photographs Mrs. Thorne preserved were sufficient." "And the 11th name on the list?" "We only found 10. Wolfe's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Did you not notice the resemblance between Jennifer Chen and Victoria Thorne Carrington? Same age, similar features despite different ethnicities." I stopped typing. "Victoria was adopted." "Eleanor's most personal rescue," Wolfe confirmed. "The daughter she raised as her own, saved from the very system Claire Fleming corrupted." Later that evening, as Fritz served a rack of lamb that would have made a French chef surrender unconditionally, Wolfe raised his wine glass in a rare gesture. "To Eleanor Thorne," he said, "a woman of remarkable character." I joined the toast, thinking of the empty family album that had now, in its way, been filled with the truth Eleanor had protected for so many years. Thanks for joining us for the Empty Family album. Did you suspect Claire Fleming before Wolfe revealed her as the mastermind behind the illegal adoption scheme? Were you intrigued by Eleanor Thorne's quiet heroism in protecting those children all those years? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Wolfe's methodical approach. The truth is revealed not in haste, but through careful observation and deduction. This is Alfie signing off from Cafe Stories.